Okay, so I want to start today's deep dive with a comparison that, on the surface, sounds completely unhinged, like something you'd find on a conspiracy forum at 3 in the morning.
All right, I'm listening.
On one side, we have Martin Luther, the German monk, the theologian, the father of the Protestant Reformation, the guy who literally changed the DNA of Western history.
A giant of history. Got it.
And on the other side, we have Sheev Palpatine
As in Darth Sidious from Star Wars.
from Star Wars, wrinkled, hooded, lightning from the fingers Palpatine.
It sounds like the setup to a very strange bard joke, doesn't it? A reformer and a sick lord walk into a tavern.
It really does. But we've been going through this massive stack of research, and the mission for this deep dive really is to show that this isn't just a meme. The argument is that if you strip away the lightsabers and the monks' robes, you find an almost identical raw playbook underneath.
It's startlingly similar, and we're not just looking for, surface-level coincidences. We're analyzing a specific political archetype, the charismatic disruptor.
The disruptive.
Yeah, this is the figure who shows up promising to burn down a corrupt, stagnant system. They are the hero of the people, right? But the tragedy, and what we're talking about today, is how that hero turns into the exact kind of authoritarian tyrant they claim to hate.
It's the wolf in sheep's clothing arc, but on a civilizational scale. And to understand it, we have to look at where they started. Because you can't have a disruptor without a broken system to disrupt.
Precisely. Context is king here. I mean, in Star Wars, the Galactic Republic wasn't just the good guys. By the time of the prequels, it was bloated, bureaucratic,
Ineffective.
totally ineffective. It was failing the outer rim systems. And then you jump to the Holy Roman Empire in the early 1500s, and the Catholic Church was in a similar state of decay.
Right, let's define that decay. We're not just talking about bad management, we're talking about indulgences.
That's the big one. Essentially, the church was selling forgiveness. You pay money, and the Pope gives you a slip of paper that, reduces your time in purgatory. It was the monetization of salvation.
A pay-to-win system for the afterlife.
Exactly. And people knew it was corrupt. There was this real simmering anger. So when Luther and Palpatine step onto the stage, they aren't manufacturing rage out of thin air. They're tapping into something very real, a very legitimate grievance.
So let's get into the first phase of this playbook. The source material calls this the master manipulator in plain sight. Before all the lightning bolts and the excommunications, how do they present themselves?
They present themselves as the reluctant servant. Look at Palpatine. He starts as the senator from Naboo. He's soft-spoken, he's kindly. He presents himself as the one sane man in a room full of shouting politicians.
Right.
He isn't trying to conquer the Republic from the outside with a fleet of Star Destroyers. He's working within the system.
He uses the tools of democracy to dismantle democracy, whispering in ears, grooming allies.
He's rotting the institution from the inside. Now, Luther is different. He's an outsider, a monk, a professor in a backwater town. But the mechanism of the humble servant is the same. When he posts those famous 95 Theses in 1517, he isn't screaming death to the Pope.
No, the tone is actually quite academic, isn't it? He's just asking for a debate.
He frames it as, I am a concerned monk, and I want to save the church from these corrupt salesmen. He positions himself as the underdog, the little guy, standing up to the massive machine of Rome. And his message was incredibly seductive. He introduces this concept of the priesthood of all believers.
Which is such a crucial term for us to unpack. The priesthood of all believers.
Yeah.
It sounds theological, but it's actually political dynamite.
It's the theological equivalent of open sourcing the software. I mean, before Luther, if you wanted to talk to God or get forgiveness, you needed the hardware, the church, the priest, the bishop.
The gatekeepers.
The gatekeepers. And Luther comes along and says, no, you have the access codes. You, the peasant, the miller, the housewife, you can read the Bible and talk to God directly.
That is the ultimate rhetoric of liberation. It's democratizing the most important thing in these people's lives, their eternal souls.
And that's the bait. It's intoxicating. Luther becomes the first true media celebrity. He uses the printing press, which was the social media of his day, to bypass everyone. His pamphlets go viral.
And he builds this massive big tent coalition, right? Peasants love him, nobles love him.
Everyone loves him. Peasants love the equality talk. Knights and nobles love that he gives them an excuse to stop sending all their money to Rome.
It's the same thing Palpatine does. He gathers the Trade Federation, the corrupt senators, but he also charms the Jedi. He builds this coalition based on the promise that he is the only one who can fix the gridlock.
But here is where the pivot happens. And this is the part of the playbook that usually catches people off guard. Once they have the following, once they have enough leverage, the script flips.
Hmm.
The Liberator suddenly becomes obsessed with order.
Palpatine manufactures the Clone Wars just to get emergency powers. He stops being the kindly senator and starts being the wartime dictator. I love democracy, he says, as he's literally tearing it down.
And Luther. Once the Reformation actually takes hold, it threatens to become chaotic. People started taking his freedom talk literally.
A little too literally for his taste.
Way too literally. He looked at that chaos, people smashing statues, monks marrying nuns, and he decided, I don't like this. He pivoted from question the Pope to obey the prince.
Which brings us to the second major part of this breakdown, the betrayal. And the source material draws this bright red line connecting Order 66 in Star Wars to the German Peasants' War of 1525.
This is the moment the mask slips. In Star Wars, we all know Order 66. Palpatine used the Jedi as his generals, his protectors. But the moment they are no longer useful, the moment they pose a threat to his total control, he flips the switch, wipes them out. He betrays the very people who fought his war for him.
And the parallel with Luther is the Peasants' War. I think for a lot of people listening, this is the part of Luther's story that gets glossed over in history class. We remember the hammer in the door, but not the slaughter.
It's often omitted because it complicates the whole hero narrative, but here are the facts. By 1524, the German peasants had taken Luther's message of spiritual equality and applied it to their actual lives. They thought, if I'm a priest before God, why am I a serf to this landlord?
Why am I paying these crushing taxes?
Exactly. They even wrote a manifesto, didn't they? The 12 Articles.
He did.
And the 12 Articles were remarkably reasonable. They wanted to pick their own pastors, they wanted access to fishing waters and forests, they wanted an end to serfdom, and they explicitly cited Luther as their inspiration. They thought he was their guy.
So they rise up, hundreds of thousands of them, a full-blown revolution. What does Luther do?
At first, he tries to mediate. But when the violence starts, when the peasants start burning castles and challenging the actual structure of society, Luther panics. He realizes this social revolution is going to alienate the princes, and he needs the princes to protect him from the Pope.
So he has to choose. The peasants who believe in his message or the elite power structure that's keeping them alive.
And he chooses the elite with a vengeance. He writes this pamphlet titled, and this is the real title, Against the Robbing and Murdering Hordes of Peasants.
That is not subtle. That sounds like war propaganda.
It's horrific. He doesn't just say, stop fighting. He gives the princes theological cover to massacre them. I want to read a quote from the source here because it's just shocking. Luther writes, therefore let everyone who can smite, slay, and stab, secretly or openly.
Wait, stab secretly or openly?
Remembering that nothing can be more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel. He compares them to mad dogs.
Stab, smite, slay. This is the man of God.
This is the man who chose order over justice. The princes followed his advice. They crushed the rebellion. The estimates vary, but it's somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 peasants slaughtered.
That is Luther's Order 66. He wiped out the grassroots movement that empowered him because it threatened the new establishment he was building.
Precisely. Both Palpatine and Luther, when push came to shove, sided with the institution. Palpatine chose the empire over the republic. Luther chose the feudal lords over the common man. They both decided that true freedom was just too dangerous.
But you can't just kill everyone. I mean, you can kill a lot of people, but to maintain power long-term, you need a story. You need an ideology.
Right. Violence is the tool, ideology is the glue, and this leads us to the third pillar, authoritarian theology.
For Palpatine, it's the Sith code, right? The idea that the Force is a tool for domination. He sells it as peace and security, but the engine is fear.
And for Luther, as he gets older and more entrenched with the princes, he develops what's known as the two kingdoms doctrine.
Let's break that down, because the source flags this as the key to his authoritarian shift. What are the two kingdoms?
It's a way of splitting the world to justify tyranny. Luther argued there is the spiritual kingdom, your soul, your relationship with God, and then there's the secular kingdom, the government, the laws, the king. In the spiritual kingdom, you're free, but in the secular kingdom, you're a subject.
So even if the prince is a total tyrant, even if he's cruel,
Luther says, suck it up. He argued that secular rulers are God's sword. They are put there by God to maintain order in a sinful world. So rebelling against the king is the same as rebelling against God.
that is a massive shift from the guy who stood up to the Pope and said, "Here I stand, I can do no other."
It turns that logic completely on its head. He created a theological permission slip for the state to do whatever it wanted, as long as it didn't force you to deny Christ. If the prince wants to tax you to death, you obey. Wage a pointless war, obey.
It just removes any wiggle room for the common person. Dissent becomes a sin.
And he applied this ruthlessly. Groups like the Anabaptists, who were radical reformers, Luther didn't just disagree with them. He supported the death penalty for them. He believed they were tearing at the fabric of his Christian society.
So Palpatine has the dark side to enforce his will, and Luther hands the princes the divine right to crush anyone who steps out of line. It's a total consolidation of power.
And to keep that power, you need one more thing. You need a common enemy. You need scapegoating.
This brings us to the fourth, and honestly, the darkest point of this entire comparison: manufacturing another.
It's the oldest trick in the authoritarian handbook. Palpatine needs to turn the Republic into a military dictatorship. How does he justify it? He says the Jedi are traitors.
Right.
He says they're warmongers. He creates this conspiracy theory that the Jedi are trying to take over, which unifies the public against them. The Jedi are the reason you aren't safe.
The Jedi are the reason the war keeps going. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Luther creates a similar narrative. And we have to talk about his later writings on Jewish people. This is the stuff that definitely does not make it into the Sunday school lesson, but it is essential to the playbook.
The source material highlights a specific text from 1543 called On the Jews and Their Lies.
Yes. And look, you could argue it's one of the most anti-Semitic texts in the history of Western literature. We're not using that term lightly. The source describes it as eliminationist.
What does he actually call for in this text? Because I think people assume it's just, general medieval prejudice, but the research suggests it's much more systematic.
It's a blueprint for pogroms. He advises the princes to set fire to synagogues and schools. He says to destroy their homes, confiscate their prayer books. He says rabbis should be forbidden to teach on pain of death.
Wow.
He even suggests they should be drafted into forced labor or just expelled from the country entirely.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
And this is coming from the same man who, 20 years earlier, wrote that Christians should treat Jews kindly to convert them.
That's the mask-off dissent we're talking about. Early Luther thought, once I purify the church, the Jews will see the truth and convert. When they didn't, when they stuck to their faith, he took it personally. He became vindictive. He dehumanized them, calling them poisoners and devil's people.
It's the same mechanism as Palpatine. If you're not with me, you're my enemy. And if you're my enemy, you aren't just wrong, you are an existential threat that has to be eliminated.
And it serves a political purpose, too. It rallies the faithful. It says, we are the good Christians, and they are the threat to our society. It creates a siege mentality that makes people cling tighter to the leader.
It really paints a picture of a descent, doesn't it? Which is the final point the research makes. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn.
The source calls it the long con for Palpatine and the decline for Luther. Palpatine schemes for, 13 years across the prequel movies? He plays the long game, slowly eroding norms until he can seize power.
And for Luther, we're looking at a career spanning decades. The Luther of 1517 is not the Luther of 1546.
Not even close. By the 1540s, Luther is a sick man. He's suffering from kidney stones, vertigo, heart issues. He's in constant pain. And he's frustrated. He thought the Reformation would bring about the end times or some golden age of piety. Instead, he just sees political squabbling and a world that is still messy.
So he becomes the grumpy old man archetype, but with the power to influence nations.
He becomes bitter, paranoid, and authoritarian. The source describes him as a mid-career consolidator who turns into a hate-spewing autocrat. It's a tragedy of character, really. The very same stubbornness that allowed him to stand up to the Pope became the stubbornness that wouldn't let him tolerate any dissent.
It's almost like the ring of power in Tolkien. The power to change the world eventually corrupts the person holding it.
That is the danger of the charismatic disruptor. We get so caught up in the disruption part, the excitement of tearing down the old corrupt system, that we forget to ask what they're building in its place.
We cheer for the rebel without checking their blueprints for the new government.
Exactly. Palpatine tore down a stagnant republic, but he built a fascist empire. Luther tore down a corrupt papacy, but he built a state church system that demanded absolute obedience and demonized its enemies.
The source uses a great analogy to wrap this up. It says Luther's late venom was the forced choke on tolerance.
That's a great image. Palpatine had lightning fingers. Luther had Incan princes. But the result is the same. Chains.
It is a sobering thought.